There is absolutely no way to know what is going on in the Command Council. And yet they have, on paper and in practice, the power to determine how we all live.
As South Africa emerges from its fourth wave of COVID-19, questions must be asked about the ongoing continuation of the state of disaster and the National Coronavirus Command Council. While the Institute of Race Relations is running a campaign to end the state of disaster and to disband the Command Council, joining me to discuss this is IRR Campaigns Manager, Gabriel Crouse. So Gabriel, what is the current state of the pandemic at the moment?
So as many people I'm sure will be aware, we are exiting the fourth wave. We're entering the fourth trough. Effectively, case numbers have long been coming down, and at a 14 to 17 day delay, death numbers have been coming down too. It's worth bearing in mind that the death numbers in the fourth wave over the Christmas or the festive period were lower than the average flu season, as pointed out by virologist Professor Shabir Mahdi from WITS. So we really seem to have entered the endemic endgame. These results, where cases spike but deaths stay relatively flat, were exactly what we predicted and communicated last year on the back of estimates about how many South Africans had already recovered from COVID-19 and scientific analyses of how strong that recovery is in comparison with vaccination recovery. If you combine it all together, South Africa was in a very strong position to weather the storm, as it were. And that is what has happened. Subsequently, the Department of Health has conceded that 70 to 90% of South Africans have contracted COVID-19, and that this provides a very robust form of protection against severe illness and death, as do vaccinations. The state of play is basically that we have entered the endemic endgame. One of the questions that people like to ask, and it's an important one, is whether there will be a fifth wave of respiratory illness that is severe. Most certainly. Winter is coming, and every winter on record in South Africa, there has been some serious pathogen going around that has killed quite a few people. That might be an influenza pathogen this time round, returning to its dominance over coronaviruses, but it is quite likely to be a coronavirus variant from SARS-CoV-2. Nevertheless, because of the factors that I've just explained, by far the most likely scenario is what the Danish government would call an ordinary but serious illness.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
So Gabriel, you and your colleagues in the campaigns team at the IRR submitted over 16,000 names to the union buildings, calling for an end to the state of disaster. What was the crux of your argument in that submission? And did you get a warm response from the officials at the union buildings?
The crux of our argument is firstly the scientific evidence, as has already been laid out. We are not in an extraordinary pandemic situation anymore. We are in an ordinary but serious endemic situation. The crux of our legal argument is that the Constitution requires parliamentary oversight and parliamentary scrutiny into the law of the land. The power to make the law sits with Parliament, and it's not to delegate that power, absolutely. But that is what has happened in effect, because Parliament gave the power to the executive, or rather the executive took the power from Parliament to make up the rules of when you can go to sleep and what shoes you're allowed to buy and so on and so forth. And there's no mechanism at the moment for Parliament to take it back. The executive has to give it back, and the executive hasn't given it back despite the evidence. For example, in November and October last year, we had the lowest death and case numbers on record, and yet Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the Cochrane minister, kept reissuing updates to the state of disaster, kept extending it. So there was no evidence to support that. The subsequent wave, there's nothing that the government did which required a state of disaster in that period or before that, especially not before that. And nevertheless, it was extended through that, and now it's been extended again. That is an abrogation of parliamentary oversight. It means that the rules don't get scrutinized by members of parliament. It also means that the public doesn't have a chance for participation in thinking about what those rules should be. And that is usually a process which stops bad rules from becoming laws in the first place. Instead, what people have had to do is go to the court to appeal after the fact. And that is very expensive to those who go to court. And it's even more expensive to the rest of the country, because in the meanwhile, the rule stands, destroying livelihood. South Africa has, per capita, as far as I can tell, the highest increase in unemployment to date through the pandemic.
What are the risks of the ongoing continuation of the state of disaster? Because many people might be saying, oh, well, this is just a kind of a contingency or a backup that if we do see subsequent waves or a new variant, that we have this mechanism. What would be the risks there, but also some of the alternatives that you would propose for dealing with this, what seems to be the tail end of the pandemic?
Well, the first thing to note is that the contingency is already in place, even when Parliament has its regular oversight. If we're in a normal situation, the president can declare a state of disaster, and then we go into that contingency mode. We don't have to stay in the state of disaster the whole way through. The danger is that the Command Council is able to both practically and theoretically burn our constitutional norms to ash. They have already done this in practice. The number of regulations that they have passed that have made law in South Africa that have been deemed irrational is alarming. There are several more that would have been deemed irrational, but people couldn't afford to get it to court in time. At the moment, as you say, they're in a holding position, so it's more theoretical. But think about what that theory is. It's the theory that South Africa is not really a constitutional democracy, that parliamentary oversight and scrutiny by the public doesn't really matter. Our attorneys have asked the Command Council severally, and the presidency and the Cochrane Ministry, why did you extend the state of disaster? Why have you used these methods and not those methods? Have you considered less limiting means for achieving the same ends? All questions that have to be answered by Parliament when it's making a usual law. The Command Council hasn't answered any of these questions. We've asked, do you even keep minutes at your meetings and an attendance register? They won't even say that. There is absolutely no way to know what is going on in the Command Council. And yet they have, on paper and in practice, the power to determine how we all live. Every day that precedent is maintained is a day that emboldens both those in power and ordinary South Africans to think that the trade-off between a promise of security and constitutional democracy is such that you should just give up on constitutional democracy as long as someone is promising you security. This is really very textbook normal stuff. That is how democracies tend to fall from the inside, because people make that trade-off mistake. So that's why we think it's important to end this and do it promptly.
Gabriel Crouse, thank you very much for joining us on the CRA. Let's hand over to you, our viewers. Do you think that it's time to end the state of disaster and the Coronavirus Command Council? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. And also a quick reminder that the CRA has a number of other services and products available to its clients. There's a link in the description below where you can join us on our 30-day free trial. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.